Okay, thank you. So I'd like to introduce Lynda and Pat, who are going to be our special guests today. And some of you may know one, but perhaps not the other. So I'm just going to give a very brief introduction, and then I've got a leading question to ask them about how they started with P4C. So Pat Hannam has been a P4C educator for a long time, over 20 years, in fact. She's also, some of you in the room I know will know Pat from being a county inspector advisor for RE, history and philosophy, and leading P4C initiatives across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. Some of you maybe in the room already know Lynda Dunlop. She's a member of the University of York Science Education Group, where she teaches and researches science and environmental education. She's also the director of the Education for Environment Sustainability at York. So I'm going to start with a question. And if I start with Lynda, perhaps, is that okay? With our questions. And I'm really curious about how you both found out about P4C. You know, how did that happen? And if you can respond by way of with an introduction to yourselves.
Thanks, Jane. Yeah, so I found P4C, I think about 15 years ago, might be a bit longer, but I was working at Ulster University on a public engagement project, Science and Society, and it was a Wellcome Trust project to engage young people aged 11 to 14 with social and ethical issues associated with contemporary science. So research that was going on in the university was around personalised medicine, human enhancement, cloning, use of pesticides. And one of the members of the team, David Hunter, had worked with Philosophy for Children in New Zealand and had introduced that as the approach to doing these discussions with young people. So he recommended a SAPERE level 1, and I had such an amazing and transformational time on the level 1. So that's kind of how I got into P4C.
Okay, thank you, Lynda, and Pat. If you'd like to respond, I'm curious. I mean, I knew you when you first started P4C, but I'm curious from those early days, how you found P4C. How did that happen?
Yeah, so my youngest child was just a very tiny person, and the opportunity came to go back into teaching. This was around 1999. And there was a social worker who was working in a sort of one of our friends who said, I was going to try and organise this day on P4C or an afternoon. Would you be interested? Philosophy for children, I thought. Now, I've got a philosophy degree, and I really didn't get how children might get into this thing. I thought, all right, I'll come along. And Will Ord was running that together with Chris Rowley, who Jane knows very well. Anyway, I think many of us were so excited by this session that we ganged people to run a level 1, which happened at Charlotte Mason College. And then I'd bumped into Jane because of a project that was going on in Cumbria. And we managed to, there was a conference at Borwick Hall in Cumbria. And then I think Jane and we did a pincer movement basically on Roger, who was very kind of well involved with SAPERE, to run a level 2. And that happened at Swarthmore Hall, where I was living at the time. We was able to embed it into the RE department that I was at that time leading. And I then went on and did a level 3, and the rest is history, as you say. But it was an inspiring transformation from thinking, how could children possibly do philosophy? Because I'd only got academic philosophy in my mind, to then finding something that enabled me to be present as a teacher in the classroom in a way I'd always wanted to, but my own PGC hadn't given me the skills to. And then especially to really listen to young people and open up dialogical environments rather than a more didactic way of doing things. So it would transformed my life, as we can all probably say. Thanks, Jane.
Thank you, Pat. So we're going to lead on to the questions. So we've got a series of 4 questions, which I'm going to ask Pat and Lynda, and perhaps they might dialogue together. That might happen. And then after the 4 questions, we're going to put all of you into breakout rooms to reflect, have time to reflect on what Pat and Lynda have said, and then bring back to the main room with a question that Pat and Lynda can further reflect on as well. So that's sort of the format of what's going to happen. So thank you both for introducing yourselves. So the first question that we have is how can P4C, can philosophy for children help teachers and young people think creatively and critically about significant questions of our time, and why might that matter? I don't know who'd like to start us off.
Shall I go first this time?
Yeah, okay.
But I'll just say a little bit, because I think a conversation would be interesting for everybody, really. I think, look, the short answer is yes. We can go into why in a way that I think P4C is particularly suited for this as a kind of pedagogical proposal, a way of teaching in the classroom. I don't see it just as a tool or as a method. I think it's a way of existing as a teacher in the classroom. Why does it matter? Because right now we need young people, children and young people emerging into this very strange world, who I think can make wise judgments that have been considered not just on their own, but with other people. I can say more about that in response to another question, but also young people and children who can disagree agreeably. And for those of us who've been involved in philosophy for children a while, that's quite a standard phrase, really, who can disagree agreeably. We don't all think the same about things, but we have to live in the same world. There aren't many worlds. There is one world we're all living in, the common world that we all share. So as well as thinking logically and clearly and critically, we need young people who are going to come at this that's not going to get better without them in a creative way. So creative, imaginative, innovative, out of the box ways of thinking together. So that's my first answer, Lynda.
I'd love to disagree with you, Pat, but I don't think I can
Go on.
from what you've said. And I think so, particularly in the context of science, I think or public dialogue around science. I think that, when you're talking about the state of the world and the kind of polarized nature of a lot of public discussion about science or about climate change, and the kind of role of misinformation and in public communication, I think I see a place for P4C in really breaking some of those really unhelpful ways of communicating down, so that whether it's being able to spot fallacies in the way that information is being presented, or just thinking deeply about the assumptions, questioning what's being said, and then also that space for disagreement, but in a constructive sort of way. So I think there's a massively there's a huge need for P4C and the sort of dialogue and way of relating to each other that it brings about.
Sort of to add to that is what's really important about this project and some other projects that are also funded by Templeton in relation to the intersection between religion and science, is that there are misapprehensions out there, broadly speaking, about both things, that somehow science is all about right answers that have already been discovered more or less, and we just need to tell children what they are and get them to repeat them. And also that religion is only about beliefs, and we can teach them and you can know them, remember and regurgitate them for an exam. Now, I think, I'm not a scientist, but I'm interested that that's a misapprehension about what science is. And it's likewise to say that religion is all about beliefs, as if they could set them up like propositions and knock them down. To my mind, that isn't what religion is. What it isn't what it is to exist as a person with a religious orientation on the world. It's more about a way of existing. How do we exist in this one common world together? And what sort of, what do we need to know and find out about and explore together? And this is what's very important about this thing. And the way often that the two subjects are not taught well in schools either. Yeah.
Okay. I think, thank you, Pat. Thank you for that.
It might, just briefly, it might matter because the world, the common one we all share, just might depend on the capacity for wise judgments and sorting things out together fast. It matters. Ultimately, existentially.
Thank you, Pat, for that extra reflection there. And as you say, the project has been innovative, bringing science and RE teachers together in doing that, in having training, cross-department training, looking at the potential of cross-subject philosophical inquiries as well as distinct. So it leads us nicely on, I think, that, Pat, to our next question was, well, in what ways might philosophy for children, P4C, be helpful in engaging young people in scientific and religious or ethical issues regarding things like the climate or biodiversity crisis? Would you like to start, Lynda?
Okay, yep. So I think, yeah, in a number of ways, I think. One, through a kind of method or approach or way of thinking and exploring those sorts of issues, and then in other ways relating to, well, I guess more philosophy of those issues. So what do we need to know about how science works? How can we understand the issue? What sort of questions do we need to know to move forward on it? How do we make good quality arguments? So I think there's a couple of ways in which philosophy for children, both in the way it's done and then the sort of concepts or issues that are addressed through philosophical inquiry that can help to address those issues. And I think also sort of opening up the space for disagreement and exploring potential futures and imagining potential futures together is another thing that P4C can.
Yeah. I think, can I add to that I think when it's really important, a distinctive feature, a distinguishing feature even about philosophy for children in the Lippmann tradition is that we really believe, or we hold to our hearts, that children, young people, human beings can ask questions that really matter and are very likely to be philosophical, that philosophical questions are not the preserve of adults or particular adults either. And that sense that when children are invited to come up with their own questions and to explore their own questions, that offers the opportunity for a kind of interestedness, an attentiveness that I don't know of anything else that quite does that. That's absolute quality of attention that we see amongst very small children all the way through to teenagers and adults. But when it's been their question, it's their thing. It's not one that teachers have said, oh, well, this might be interesting for us to explore today, class. It starts from their position. Sometimes, as the teacher, that's very uncertain. And sometimes it's irritating when they come up with something that we didn't think they were going, and actually we can't see the philosophy in it. My experience is that the children often see more philosophy in more things than I have done as an adult. So this quality of attentiveness, I think, is hugely important. At that point, we can then introduce something new, and young people are likely to receive new information, whether it's a scientific piece of information or a research paper or another thing, information about how the people have led their lives in relation to RE. Young people are likely to receive that. I mean, we've written about this in the Hampshire Agreed Syllabus, Living Difference 4, and I've written about this as well, is that there's a kind of intellectual open-mindedness that starts to emerge over time that is fundamentally important and that might not happen otherwise. I think it often doesn't happen actually in the classroom, that where teachers are telling children things only, that intellectual open-mindedness doesn't happen. And then, of course, a community of inquiry can come very helpfully at the end of that as well, where they've got something to go on, so that the philosophical inquiry then can be well informed by some knowledge that has been communicated in some way. So I think it's absolutely fundamentally important that it's not just them having a quick chit chat about their own thoughts. There's an intellectual engagement that can happen as well. I could say a lot more about that than is possible here, but I think, and this is also my experience of working with teachers who've never encountered this, is I don't know, given the fact that much teacher education is very didactic and has become increasingly so in recent years, I don't know of anything else that is likely to shift that into a more creative way of teaching. So it's not just children, young people that gain from this, but I think the whole school environment can too. That's it. Thank you. Yeah, Lynda, I don't know what you think about.
Yeah, I was thinking of yeah, about that being uncertain and exploring things together. There's a trust that develops through that that's very hard to build in other ways, and I think that also contributes to that, like changing of the wider school environment. But yeah, also valuing children's place and the knowledge that children are bringing to bear upon a question. I think yeah, that being uncertain together allows that to happen in a different sort of way.
Mm,
Okay,
yeah.
thank you. I think that leads nicely onto our next question. Pat and Lynda, you've talked about this sort of intellectual attentiveness that you're suggesting maybe doesn't, where else would that happen in the curriculum? And therefore, is it purely an intellectual exercise? Or our next question is, should P4C inquiries lead to action? Should it be more than intellectual attentiveness in our communities? Pat, would you like to?
Yeah, shall I kick off on that? I mean, I think, again, the short answer is yes. And I'll qualify that by saying that I think it's worth our while thinking about what we mean by action. Do we just mean doing stuff, And that might be useful. So at the end of an inquiry in relation to climate or the environment or science or religion or anything, I'm just thinking about a very particular example with secondary youngsters. It was a GCSE class and we'd been talking about fair trade, I think. And at the end of the inquiry, I kind of said, well, would we want to do anything about this? And yes, we think we ought to go and see the head. And there was a meeting, another lesson. Maybe we should see if we can't get school uniform, for example, sourced from a fair trade way. And I know of other people who've been doing an inquiry in a different way, where the children all went out and planted bulbs in the garden. You could see there could be very many practical things. But I also want to say that I think the dialogue and the conversation and the place that we open up in the community inquiry is also a kind of action in the way that Hannah Arendt speaks of. And I think that this is a kind of action. So speech is one thing, or thought, thinking about things, speaking about one thing, but together in a plural environment of the classroom, this is action and this is transformatory. We're not the same people at the beginning of an inquiry as we are at the end of it. So finding different ways to explore that and acknowledge that, I think as teachers, that's very strong as well. So it can lead, going out, let's go and go into town and protest against this. It could lead to practical application. But I think it's important actually that teachers, we don't just let the inquiry drift as the bell goes and we run out and forget about it, but that we do think about, well, what should we do? What can we do as a consequence of our conversation, as a consequence of, are there any consequences as in result of what we've talked about today? Yeah, what do you think, Lynda?
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. I think I started off thinking that yes, it should inform action, but and not so directly. So I think our actions should be informed by good thinking by ourselves and with others, and we should also reflect carefully on our actions, but maybe it's not such a what do we do as a result of this inquiry, but more how can this inquiry process help us to reflect on the ways we are in the world, and what thinking can we carry on doing that might inform who we are. So I think maybe I'm erring more towards no directly, but yes as a way of thinking and being.
Can I pick up with that, because I think this is a really important point, and it leads into the next question as well, in relation to what do we actually think action is? What does it mean? Is that about being an activist? Well, not necessarily, but nevertheless, the community of philosophical inquiry, the dialogue, conversation changes us over time, and acknowledging that is likely to be the case. And yeah, I won't say anymore because it really leads into the next question very nicely.
Just before we go to the next question, on that question of action, I suppose in the context of the climate crisis, when we're talking about action, I guess like doing nothing or carry on as usual is taking an action, isn't it? But it's an action for a different sort of world. So I'd want to see action like that needs really to be described as an action, or well, but maybe we'll get there when we think about what action is. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you both of you for opening up that concept. What do we mean by action, sort of in a philosophical way? What are the different meanings and understandings of action? So we'll move to our final question before everyone has a chance to think about what's been said themselves. So the final question is, should all schools be interested in finding spaces for young children and young people to work out what kind of people they want to be and what kind of world they want to live in? Should we start with Lynda?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think if that isn't what schools are or should be about, then I don't think I know what they should be. I mean, that's such an important thing, isn't it? Working out who you are and what sort of world you want to live in. So I think we probably do need a bit of a rethinking of education towards those aims. And I think philosophy for children, it makes that sort of thinking explicit. And I think that's one of the things that it can do there. But yeah, I'll stop garbling now.
Yeah, I think I have broadly three things to say in relation and picking up on Lynda's point. And I think it's useful. I just find it useful to think about what do we want? What is P4C about? I mean, yes, it is about conceptual analysis. And that's part of its sort of philosophical offer, if you like. And it's also about thinking clearly and logically. That's another part of its philosophical offer. But philosophy for children, the Lippmann tradition, was never only about that. It isn't only about doing philosophy. I was with Anne Sharp in her house once, and she kind of got a chopping board out and said, it's like this, and drew a line across it with a felt pen and said, it's about kind of walking a tightrope between a kind of philosophy of education, a proposal on education, and doing philosophy. So we sort of walk the tightrope between that all the time as teachers. And its third thing is about, helping children to think about, well, what kind of person am I? When I say I think, because in a way I'm saying I'm the kind of person that thinks a friend is, because, aren't I? I mean, it's coming from my heart. It's not just my head. And then if the teacher says, well, what would it be like if everybody in the world thought that? And that's a logical move. We give the children a chance to think about, well, what would it be like if everybody thought a friend was that? Would you like to live in that world? These are interruptions that the teacher can say to the class. But there's another really important thing, really, I think, Lynda, that you'd alluded to there, and that is, what do we think education is? Philosophy for children in the SAPERE or the Lippmann tradition isn't just about planting philosophy in the classroom. It's not the same as doing a philosophy A level, which, there'll be other people here who've taught that like I did. It's not the same as that. There's some overlaps, but it's not the same as teaching philosophy in that formal sense, which is what I thought it was when I first bumped into it and realized, whoa, it's much more than that. That education is about cognition. It is about the intellectual domain. It has several education, we could say, domains of educational purpose. What do we want it to do? I mean, we do want it to do that thing. We want kids to leave with some good qualifications, but that's not all of it. We want kids to be well fitted up to live in this world. But honestly, looking at the world as it is at the moment, if that's all it is, we're missing something. So education itself, it seems to me, has to be about also enabling these new, irreplaceable, unique human beings that have just come into the world. Where did they come from? If you held your baby, like, where did that come from? Exactly. It's a mystery. And they grow and emerge. If we don't give space for this new heart, to arrive into the world, then we're missing something really badly. And I think the issues we can see that schools are becoming less than healthy places sometimes for children where that is not taken seriously. So, and then I was thinking that question actually is really interesting because it's about physical spaces. I've been to some schools where some circles have been made in the class, in the school grounds. There's a school in Hampshire where they deliberately built a beautiful circle where the kids could sit outside under a shelter. Wouldn't that be lovely if all schools could have spaces where children could be offered opportunities? But it's also the emotional, the educational space, time to do this.
Thank you. Thank you very much, both of you. Such rich reflections and responses to the questions, and that interplay between the pair of you from your sort of different backgrounds in terms of RE and science as well. So quite different responses and overlaps as well. So thank you. So we are going to have a chance for everyone else in the room to have a reflect on what's been said. We're going to put you into breakout rooms for about 10 minutes. And if you join a breakout room, and then when we'll come back, but can I ask one of you in your group to bring one question back? So have your continue dialoguing about what's been said, self-facilitating, and then bring one question back to the group, and that person put it in the chat as well, and I'll get Pat and Lynda to pick up on some of your questions and add further reflections. Okay, see you in about 10 minutes.
Jane, had you envisaged that Lynda and I would join her?
Not necessarily, no, unless you want to just go in a breakout room or go and have a break. I'm just going to turn my phone off, sorry, because
Maybe I won't, just don't want to interrupt people's
yeah, I mean, it's up to you if you want to. I wasn't going to, just simply because you can if you want. But have you, yeah, you were in one with Neil and Agatha, so there's only 2 in that group. So if you went, you would go with you would go with Neil, and you'd both go with Neil
Agatha.
and Agatha. But it's up to you.
Yeah, so Agatha comes to the advanced seminars, so
Right.
maybe I will. And Neil's been running a project in Nottingham. Is that Neil?
Neil Phillipson.
He does wonderful work on P4C and science.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it's...
Yeah, maybe I'd be interested to pop in and listen.
Yeah, can you still do that? I can...
No, I think I can't see where it's gone.
I think if you click join breakout room at the bottom, if I click that, it tells me that I can join breakout room 3.
Oh, yes. Okay, see you there.
16:05, so 16... what were we 16:05? Oh goodness. Thank you, Bob, for the conversation. So what we'd like you to do now is hopefully somebody in your group, you have some more questions that you'd like to ask Pat and Lynda, they can pick up on. So if somebody could write in the chat from your group, or if you're sat there now and you've got a question that's suddenly come to mind as a result of your dialogue. And we'll just let a few come in, and then I'll ask Lynda or Pat if there's any that you want to particularly pick up on. Okay, Pat and Lynda, there's a couple of questions there. Is there one that you want to pick up on? One of you?
I was interested in Chris's question. So we're wondering how P4C fits in with science, and then possibly found an answer by reflecting on the rise in conspiracy theories. I was just wondering, was that coming from a not seeing the place for P4C in science? I was wondering if Chris could say a little bit more about the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I come from an RE background, so yeah, I'm familiar with P4C in that setting, as it were, and how it crosses over and fits with RE. I've been a primary specialist. I've taught science as well. Haven't really come across using P4C in science as such, apart from, introduce a topic and you might do something that it has a bit of a wow to it. How do you think that works? Or, what's going to happen and all the rest of it, which is to do with science skills. Is that a P4C skill? How does P4C fit in with science? But then as we were discussing it, I thought about, the conspiracy theories, the anti-vaxxers and those sort of things that are, they paint themselves into a corner basically and build themselves a monolithic worldview that, this is how it is. And, Bill Gates is putting chips in people with the COVID vaccine, et cetera, the massive growth of that. They don't want to change their mind. Whereas scientists do change their minds, of course. Anyway, I've talked too much. Jane, Pat, etc. Your thoughts about how it fits in with science.
I mean, one thing I think that in science, often that kind of wonder about the world kind of disappears. So my background is in secondary science, and sometimes that is kind of lost as there's a big curriculum to get through. And I think one of the things that that P4C can do is kind of ignite that wonder about the world and about science in the world, and what does this mean for us? So I think, yeah, there is the bit around looking at arguments and how science works and ethics around science, but also just that kind of reconnecting the world, science, and the children themselves. I'd invite others who work in science to say something.
Okay, maybe perhaps people could, if they want to, put some comments in the chat in reflecting on that, what Lynda's just say, if there's anything extra, perhaps some of the project teachers who are here as well. But Pat, is there a question there that you'd like to pick up on?
I'm wondering if I could kind of weave the last two together, one that's Grace and then one that Neil asked there, and seeing if it also has something to bear on the other questions in a way. I think the word inquiry is interesting for me, and that in P4C, in the SAPERE, we tend to spell it with an E as an enquiry. In the original, in English, we've got two words. We've got inquiry, as in investigation, as in, you know, there's been a train crash and we're going to have an investigation, or one into COVID, or into whether somebody told the truth or not to Parliament, for example, if you've been watching the news today. But in England, we tended to use the word E. When they were translated, the community of inquiry with an I into Spanish, into Mexico, they decided not to go with Comunidad de Investigación, which implies a kind of end result that's already, you know, we just got to find it out. And they went with Comunidad de Diálogo. So it's like the community of conversation is important. And it comes back then, you know, Chris, in a way, to what is science? Is science just a bunch of stuff that we got to put in kids' heads that they regurgitate for an exam? Or is actually science itself a process of enquiry, of reaching out towards what we don't actually know yet? Still is a bit of a mystery. You know, gravity, for example, still is really quite no. So I'm thinking about the overlaps there between scientific inquiry, philosophical inquiry, and pure intellectual inquiry. There is kind of really important there. And managing disagreement, therefore, becomes a process of an educational point. Managing dialogue in the classroom is actually part of the educational purpose of education, we could say. So long as we don't see education only as knowledge transmission. Once we start to see the purpose of education only in terms of knowledge transmission, or RE only as knowledge transmission, or science only, I don't know if that helps really, but disagreement doesn't become something to manage, it becomes something to enable, you know, let's have more of it really. Harmonious exploration of what it is to be a human being living in this world right now. Well, people with a religious orientation have got something to say about that, people who are interested in science. And you know what? I've heard that there are people who have a religious orientation that are quite academic scientists. Jocelyn Burnell is one of them, for example. But there are others who are well known too. But, yeah. So Xavier's asked a question. Do we think that religion and science, well, there's a question. What do we mean by truth? Oh, that's a good one for a comment. Is there anything such as truth? So again, you know, philosophy for children, the Lippmann tradition has strong roots in pragmatism as a philosophical position on an epistemological position where we can live with uncertainty. Does it matter? Lynda, please.
Sorry, I've gone on to looking at these, thinking about these lovely philosophical questions in relation to science, and I think, yeah, those sorts of questions that Grace are posting, that Grace is posting, I think really do another thing, which is help children to play with science. So I think maybe there's like a something that P4C allows is a kind of playful engagement with science in the world. And I'm thinking of some of for people who are working or thinking of doing this in science, the PhiloZoo project that Jelle de Schrijver asks these wonderful questions like, can a tree be pregnant? Can a rabbit be a scientist? Which make you think, well, what is a scientist? What is science? What is pregnancy? And so it helps you think about both the science and the big concepts as well. And I think some of those are really linked to concepts that you might explore in RE as well, thinking about the
Yes.
together.
Well, interesting. I mean, also not to put everything into, when I've been running training, it's to talk about, there are a number of different branches of philosophy, and not to only, I think children left to their own devices may often land on an ethical question, but there are others. And of course, Lippmann really started out with an interest in aesthetics. How about what is more beautiful, an oxygen atom or a carbon atom? And many people get drawn into science, not necessarily because of the intellectual, but because of an observation of the beauty of the world, of the beauty of the microscopic, of the beauty of the subatomic. I think that would have drawn me a bit more as a kid. That's a thing to think about.
Well, thank you so much, Lynda and Pat. And I'm just wondering if you'd like to say any sort of final words, reflecting on the whole of this in conversation. And then I've got just a short little task for everyone to do in the room. Any final words, thinking about all of the questions that we've had and this project itself, any final reflections?
Before I forget what I thought of, could I come in? But if Lynda, if you've got something to... No, it strikes me that it's perhaps a mistake to see these subjects as hermetically sealed away from each other, or any subject as hermetically sealed away. And I'd much rather see a kind of a school that allowed youngsters, at least some of the time, let's say 20%, to explore their own leadings and their own interests. And I'm sure that children, young people left to their own devices would explore some of the overlaps if they weren't presented as falsely hermetically sealed from each other. And this was something we did in the Hampshire Agreed Syllabus. And in Hampshire, and anybody that, there's something we called pondering time, where we deliberately said teachers can allow up to 20% of curriculum time for youngsters to explore their own interests and their own leading. And nobody kind of challenged me on it, but I was waiting for Ofsted to say, "Ooh, I can't do that." But, sorry, is this being recorded? I don't really mind now. But there's a thing. How would it be, if science and RE teachers got together a bit more often and presented some common areas of interest and then said, okay, go and do a little research project on that. There's loads of evidence that shows us when children explore their own interests, that there's a lot to gain from that. I mean, Google did it. So if Google could do it, there's Unilever, I think, also did it. So this isn't really that outrageous, but there's a literature around 20% time, which we wrote into Living Difference for. That's my final thought. Let's not present subjects as hermetically sealed from each other and allow children more time to explore their own interests with philosophy for children as a sort of an adjunct or a supportive pedagogy for that.
I just add briefly to that. I think regardless of what anyone might think about science or religion individually, that they're big things in the world, and I think it's really important that we recognize that and look at the connections and try and understand or to tackle some of the big challenges, whether it's to do with the climate crisis or other crises that we're facing, thinking about how we can use the best of what we know and can do in religion and science together. And I think if we did that, rather than looking for maybe divisions that aren't really there, we'd be in a lot better position to tackle some of those things.
Okay, thank you so much, Lynda and Pat, for your contributions this afternoon. It's been really stimulating, and I know we've recorded this webinar, so we can share this with a lot more teachers and other educators as well, both within the PPC world and beyond, hopefully. What I'd really like, as people leave, is just to write a comment, some kind of evaluation in the chat, just some feedback. It might be on your thoughts about what's been discussed, but it might be on the the format of the session. This is the first time that we've ran a in conversation session like this. Our plan next term is to run an in conversation with a focus on SEND, special educational needs development. So that we've got 2 of our schools who are special schools, so that's going to be our focus next term. So it'd be really useful to get some feedback on the sort of format, the time of day, all of those things, and pop that in the chat. At the beginning, before my computer crashed, I had some music for you to come into that was kind of relevant to the afternoon and also to the topic. So as you take time to write your comments, I'm going to put that music on. But I'd also like to just say thank you to our special guests, Lynda and Pat, for this afternoon, but also to Bob and Grace in the background, who kind of saved the day, making sure this event went on, and then my laptop seemed to have been okay. But yes, I'm going to put some music on and then let you sort of quietly slip away when you've written your comments.
Thank you very much.
Hi Jane and everyone, thank you very much.
Hi, Emma.
Thank you.
Nice to see you, Emma.